Good morning, everyone. I'm Nana Potenza, the Marketing and Communications Manager at the Tompkins Chamber. Welcome to our third session for Workforce Week, Thriving in the Evolving Workplace with Scott Dawson. We are happy to have partnered with CFC Community Credit Union with the support of Live in Ithaca to host this week of programming. The goal really is to support area businesses, organizations, and their employees in navigating today's workforce and workplace challenges and opportunities. The last 2 years have brought changes to health and wellness needs, technology, workforce recruitment, as well as how people think about work and what they expect and need from their employers. Before I introduce our presenter today, I do want to mention that we have 3 more online sessions this week, and we'll round out the event with a happy hour on Friday from 4 to 6 at Liquid State Brewing with food from Silo Food Truck. There's also a selection of non-beer and non-alcoholic drinks for anybody that isn't a beer drinker, in case you didn't want to drink beer. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Scott Dawson. Scott is no stranger to working remotely. He's worked that way since 1998. He's going to share his remote work journey, give practical recommendations for succeeding in a remote or hybrid environment, and discuss the future of remote work in a pandemic recovering world. He has also written 2 books, The Art of Working Remotely, and most recently, Handbook of the Modern Worker. We do have copies of this handbook to give away. They arrived yesterday in the mail. And anybody that is registered for a session this week will automatically be entered to win a copy, and we'll draw the winners at random on Friday morning, so that the books can be picked up at happy hour on Friday evening. Okay, Scott, thank you for being here. I'll let you take it over.
Excellent, thank you. Everyone can see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, awesome. That's the first hurdle.
True.
So first off, I'd like to start by thanking the Tompkins Chamber for having me today as part of Workforce Week. I'm going to talk to you about thriving in the evolving workplace, and of course, that's going to center around working remotely. I love any chance I can talk about my career and working remotely because it's had a huge impact on my life. And for some reason, remote work has received a lot of attention in the last few years. So this is a big number for me. So this is approximately remote workday 5,493. That's the number of business days between my start date and today, subtracting approximately 20 paid time off days a year. And you might ask yourself, okay, who is this guy that's worked like 5,000 days working remotely? And if you started working remotely because of the pandemic and you struggled at it, you might really ask, how is that possible? So looking back, it's hard to imagine, but day by day, the days add up. And my story starts, interestingly enough, I never set out to work remotely for most of my career. It was truly accidental. So I'm Scott Dawson, and I started working remotely on May 1st, 1998. By trade, I'm a user experience designer and developer. I have a background in computer science, and I help build websites and mobile applications. So throughout my career, I've worked for 2 years in traditional offices, 15 years remote at my first company, and 8 years remote at my current company. I've worked both as a manager of others and as an individual contributor. And then just some personal stuff. I'm married, I live in Trumansburg. I have 2 kids who are now, oh my gosh, 21 and 18. And this picture is from a trip that we took to Europe. It was kind of like a end of living in the house, kind of off to college trip for my daughter. This was August 2019. And 6 months later, we would be in lockdown, which is hard to believe. So first, I'm going to talk about my journey, a little bit of how did it start, how did it evolve, and then I want to spend most of the time talking about success. How can you find success as you work remotely? And then where are we headed as a workforce? You know, employer preferences, employee preferences. Some are pulling to go back to the office, and some are pulling to go fully remote. So where do we see ourselves in the future? So we'll spend some time prognosticating. 24 years remote. So let's start talking about my journey. A lot happened in this span between 1996, when I graduated from college, and present day. So 26 years ago, I had 4 choices coming out of graduate school. I could have worked in the oil and gas industry in California. I could have gone into management consulting in Virginia. I could have worked on integrated fuel systems for fighter jets in Vermont. That was a close second. But at the end of the day, finance in New York City won out. I really thought it would be fun and vibrant to work in New York. So my first job was in Long Island City, which for those of you who don't know is in Queens. It's 1 subway stop from Manhattan. That's the skyscraper in the background in the left picture. And my first office was actually kind of nice. It was on the 17th floor. It had floor to ceiling windows. I was really excited to be in a big city and have a big job. And that excitement kind of waned because every day I had a train commute, which was 30 minutes each way on a good day. There was traffic, there was stress, all a byproduct of living in that environment. And during some parts of the year, and we can relate here, you arrive at work before sunrise and leave after sunset in those dark days of winter. And that started to get kind of old. But I was distracted because I had a nice rotation program. My inaugural stint at the company was a rotation program. And I got to go work in Zurich, Switzerland for 3 months, which was fabulous. There I got exposed to a regional technology group. I spent a lot of time traveling on the weekends. My girlfriend came to see me. And this is hilarious. My texts are showing up, great. I think I quit that application too. Thank you, Mac. My girlfriend came to visit me several times while I was in Europe, and while we were there, I proposed to her. So that was another life change. So then I came back and was working again in New York City, and my fiance and I decided that we didn't want to live in that environment. So early in 1998, I had a candid conversation with my boss. I told him that I was going to look around at other jobs. I had no agenda other than to give him a heads up that, hey, long term, I don't see myself here. I'm going to start exploring either internal transfers or something else. And he sat me down and said, look, we really like the work that you're doing. Why don't you try telecommuting? And I had never heard of the term, never sought to work remotely. I never thought I'd be sitting here decades later doing the same thing and talking to you about it. But I thought that sounded cool. He said, let's do it as a trial. Nothing's permanent. So you can figure out where you want to live. As long as you can get back to New York City for trips and such easily, that's fine. So before the pandemic, ironically, that was cited as a great way to demonstrate whether something would work, is to just do a trial and say what your expected benefits are, put in processes to measure it and assess, which we did. The pandemic was a really poor way to have the entire world do that because there were no metrics. It was just don't fall apart, folks, just go home and keep doing what you're doing. But I was married in July and moved from Long Island to Waltham, Massachusetts. The company paid for an ISDN line from the telephone company. So that was twice the speed of dial-up back then. It's 128 kilobytes per second. And I had no training in remote work. I was kind of sent off into the woods and I learned as I went. And 2 years into that, obviously the trial was successful. 2 years into it, we started looking for a home, and we ended up moving as far west as we needed to afford an apartment, which in the Boston area, we ended up in Fairport, New York, which is close to where we went to undergrad school. More reasonable rents, closer to family. And then in 2000, we welcomed my daughter. All along the way, I had a dedicated home office. We made sure that we got apartments that had dedicated rooms so I could have a quiet place to work. Rochester is kind of a similar travel time to New York from Boston by plane. And I love this picture of my home office. I unfortunately don't have a picture of my Waltham office, but some of the technology in this room is hilarious to me. On the far left, I have my personal computer with a huge monitor. It's it was bigger than our television downstairs. My work laptop behind the chair, ironically, was 1.5 inch thick brick. And I didn't have an external monitor for that. I literally worked all day long on a small screen. I had a flatbed scanner, a multifunction printer and fax. And I love to tell this story about collaboration. So back then, I'm still designing and developing websites, right? I would do some work and I would upload it to a server. And my business counterpart in New York City would take a look at it. She would print off the screens. She would mark them up in pen and what she wanted changed. And she would fax them back to me. I would take the fax and I would deliver what she needed, and we would repeat that process. And it worked out really, really well. There are better ways to do it now. In 2003, after 5 total years of working remotely, we ended up moving here to Trimblesburg. And I built my house. We welcomed my son, and my wife's parents moved here. They lived in Watertown, and I grew up in Trimblesburg. So now we have everybody together. I'm working remotely. The kids are getting to know their grandparents very well. Life is good. And that's what that's where it all started. After all that change, literally a decade goes by, 10 years of solid remote work. I kept on improving my workspace. This is a picture of my current office. I'm standing at this desk, although it's now a standing desk, and I'm standing in front of it, but I got a window off to the right with a great view. And I really enjoyed that time watching the kids grow and have all the milestones that they have. I thought of another way to think about how much time has passed since I started working remotely. In Fairport, I remember feeding my daughter Elizabeth yogurt for breakfast on a little tiny spoon. And with every bite, I put a Cheerio on the spoon and give it to her. And then she'd go off to daycare. I'd start my workday. And now she's a rising senior in college, and my son is off to college this fall. It's just unbelievable. And I'm still working remotely. But also during this time, I remember an anecdote from work that led me to think that, hey, this is actually working really well. I was on a call with somebody who I'd worked with for many years. And before the call, we were having kind of just casual conversation. And they asked what office I worked in. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person doesn't actually know that I work remotely. And so I shared, and they were floored. They thought I was just across the East River in New York. And they hadn't noticed that I was fully remote. And I knew then that I was nailing remote work. My only career transition happened in 2013. So to my second company, I kind of got tired of what I was doing and was looking for a change. So I tapped my network. I found another remote job after 17 years at my first company. And I remember it was surreal. I had a 48-hour period where I had no job, no benefits. And it was an odd feeling not being attached to a company, but it was short-lived. I was in New York City the following Monday, just a different address. I spent the week getting my laptop configured, meeting new people, and then I was fully remote again. And then 2020 happened, and the whole world became familiar with working remotely. So I didn't always advocate or talk about my situation. It's just kind of how I've always worked. But my advocacy kind of started in 2016. I was looking for community, and community really didn't exist in the world of the work world I inhabited. Definitely in my community, made a lot of friends. But I started a chat on Twitter. I called it work from home chat initially. And there are a lot of Twitter chats that are really successful. Like there's one for runners, there's one for freelancers. And at the beginning of work from home chat, I literally was chatting with myself for the first few weeks, but people started showing up. And it was like one of those, if you build it, they will come. I rebranded it to remote chat to be more inclusive over time, but I kept that up for 5 years. So there were 250 episodes, 1,500 questions, hundreds of unique participants, and they're from all over the world. It was a great way to meet people and have relationships, even though we were all virtual. We were all doing the same thing. Then the start of my books, one of my colleagues, he was a new dad, and he was home and really struggling with being able to do work while being around other people, because he was home so he could help support his family with his new child, and he was having trouble finding his groove and getting his work done. So he reached out to me, hey man, you've done this for a long time. What tips do you have for me? So we had an exchange, and it was really good and productive. And he says, you should write this down. Like, you can't just like tell me, you have to tell other people. I'm like, actually, it's a pretty good idea. So I sat down with the intention of writing a book. And I wrote every morning for half an hour, every weekday morning for 6 months. And 6 months later, I had The Art of Working Remotely. And so I published that in July of 2019. And then another project came to me New Year's Day of 2021. I wondered what it would look like if I published a remote work tip every day of the year. I wondered if I could come up with 365 unique things, and I actually did. And so that was the book that Nana held up, the Handbook for the Remote Worker. And that's actually a really fun read because it is a one a day kind of go through, and you might find something that you can apply to your work. All right, so let's get to the meat of it. Recommendations for success. And I'm going to start with my number one tip for being successful as a remote worker. And it really doesn't have anything to do with being remote. It has everything to do with being a work. So regardless of how you work or who you work with, commit, deliver, and repeat. This is the simplest recipe for building trust. You promise to do a job, you do that job, and you do it every day. There's a lot of underpinnings to that, so I'm going to spend some more time giving tips, but I like the simplicity of this. So I can divide advice into two main categories. There are those who are working remotely as entrepreneurs for their own business. So they don't have an office, they're home, they might have people they bring together for projects or clients all over the world, and you might be working remotely for other companies as part of a team. So there's a pretty substantial overlap of the tips for people who are working on their own. That's a pretty big subset of those who collaborate with others. But I'll start with the entrepreneurs. So if you're by yourself. So number one, avoid overwork. And this was really a challenge for folks in the pandemic because if you had been traveling to an office, you now lack the commute that kind of bookended your day. So within the category of avoiding overwork, have consistent start and end hours. So to the extent that you can, start and end your work days at the same times. And to help facilitate that, I love startup and shutdown routines. Every morning looks a little bit different for me, but usually it starts with some kind of fitness, like a run. You know, after my run, it's time to get down and get to work. But a lot of people have a morning walk that they use to simulate a commute. It provides a boundary between being non-work and work, but also having a consistent place to go work where just by being there, it signals it's time to work. So if you have the luxury of a dedicated room where you live to work, that's a great way to have a cue. At the end of the day, I also have a shutdown routine. I close my laptop lid. Bye, Mom. I close my laptop lid. I put it on a shelf and I literally say goodbye to work. Sometimes audibly, which is fun. But if you're working at your kitchen counter or another place in your house and you don't have a dedicated place for your things, it can be really effective to have like a basket, like a work basket, where you put your laptop, you put your work phone, any work papers, and literally put it out of sight, because that will help you transition as well. Set reasonable deadlines for yourself. That'll help prevent overwork as well. Like if you don't have a realistic deadline, you're going to be working morning, noon, and night. So give yourself the time that you need to get your job done. And then reward yourself for a job well done, such as another cup of coffee or taking a break to go outside. I've promised myself a cup of coffee, a second after this presentation. Staying focused. Again, working in a dedicated space without other things around to pull your focus. You know, I'm here in my home office. There's not a lot going on here. So nothing's really pulling my focus except for my random texts that are popping up. Eliminating distractions is also really important. So when I was younger And starting out, this is actually from my Fairport days, I became addicted to video games. There were two in particular that were culprits. One was Age of Empires, and one was a driving game called Need for Speed. And I found that I would start to play them to kind of reward myself for working hard. And I would look up 2 hours later and realize I've been playing games the whole time, and I'm supposed to be working. Like that's not good. So my way of eliminating those distractions was to literally throw away the media. I took the CDs, I took my little Sidewinder driving wheel, and I threw them in the trash. It's a little harder with smartphones and apps, but be vigilant about recognizing when something's pulling too much of your time away from what you're supposed to be doing. Some people laugh at this next one because you may or may not like doing chores around the house. I like a clean house. And it can be really tempting to say, all right, I'm just going to clean the kitchen counters. And then I recognize that the foyer is trashed. And then I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of mud around. I should really vacuum, right? So you don't want your entire day to turn into like a chore fest. I literally have a rotation. I have a chore chart. I'm a full-grown adult, but I have a chore chart. So every day there might be something for me to do to check off, but I know that I don't have to go do everything because there will be a day for it down the road. So that can be an effective way. Another way of staying focused, silence notifications on your phone, or just put your phone away if you don't need it. And then you may have heard of techniques like Pomodoro. As far as staying heads down at your desk, Pomodoro is a technique for kind of time slicing your day. You have these half-hour work sprints, and then at the end of, there's a little brief break between each one, and at the end of a certain collection of them, you get to take a more substantial break. But everyone's motivated by different things. Find what works for you and use it. Let's see. Managing expectations. All right, so you're on your own. So whose expectations do you need to manage? Well, if you're an entrepreneur, you are working with other people who you're consulting for or who are buying products from you. Let your clients know what you'll do and when you'll do it. And bonus points if you convey that information in a persistent place where they can always see it. A common thread in all the things I'm going to talk about is around communication. So when you're remote, the need to communicate and communicate well is far more amplified than if you were physically working with other people. Tell clients when you'll be out. And I'm not talking about like out for a trip to the post office. I used to have a colleague who did that. They would chat us and let us know that they were going to the post office. I'm like, I do not need to know that. But if you're going to be out like off the grid for a few days, you should let people know. And then lastly, let others in your workspace, like your family or your friends who might be sharing the space with you, let them know when you have to be heads down. For example, I'm doing a presentation right now. So if there were people in my house, and there are not, I would have shut my door and I would have let them know that, hey, between 9 and 10:15 today, I've got some important stuff going on. Please don't come bother me unless somebody's bleeding. All right, setting boundaries. I'm sure most of us have figured this out, but being always on will burn you out. So when you're home, do take the time for yourself. That time at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, this little break in the middle we call lunch, it's a really important time, and set boundaries around those things so they don't get encroached on. Learning the value of saying no. It can be really hard to say no to people, but it can also be really important for your health and the things you already committed to. So that's another boundary. Safeguard time in your calendar for work, so it's not all meetings. I'm going to talk about meetings in a little bit, but I literally have an appointment with myself every morning from 9 to 11. And my colleagues don't necessarily know about this, but it's a recurring 9 to 11, and it's titled Deep Work. And I literally block it off. So it does get scheduled over sometimes, but for the most part, it looks like I'm already committed, and I've already committed to myself. Do the same thing for lunch, except that one says out of office. So every day, 12 to 1, I am out of the office for lunch. Again, it's not a surefire way of preventing people from scheduling over you, but it can help. And the last one here is working in your window. So you are not stuck working 9 to 5. There's no normal. So everyone has their own style, their own time of day when they're most productive. So you can choose what works for you. But But if you do work non-traditional hours, let people know. If you happen to work with people in different time zones, this would actually be a really great way of meeting them where they are too. So if you work with people in California, you could start work really early here on the East Coast. Actually, it'd be really late. Or vice versa if you work with people in Europe. And ironically, when I was putting together a slide, I read an article in the New York Times where they were talking about this concept of a double or triple hump day, where you spend different sprints of time working, and is definitely not 9 to 5. It might be 9 to 2 and then a sprint of work after dinner. So you can kind of choose your own adventure and reap the benefits. So the next three slides will talk about people working on teams. The suggestions here are really not just for managers. Anyone on a team can and should take an active role in making sure these things happen. Strong teams don't just have strong managers, they have strong team players. So effectiveness, are you getting the result that you intend out of your work? So the first is to set clear expectations. Managers need to set clear expectations in a persistent place. They might be like goals for the entire group or company or team, or they might be individual goals for you in a performance management system. But the important thing is that they're written down and documented. If you don't have a target, you can't hit it. But if you're the worker in this scenario, if you don't feel like you have clear understandings about what's expected of you, ask or propose your own goals and have a conversation about it. I do that every single year with my boss. I say, here's what I think I want to work on this year. And, we have a conversation, and then that gets written down in my performance plan. Now that the expectations are clear and people know what's expected of them, you have to give your team the tools and the environment they need to succeed. So things in this category are software, hardware, professional development. If people need skills that they don't have, it's really important that you give that to them, set them up for success. And then monitor and adjust as you learn to deliver in a distributed environment. I like to think about what was working for our team in May of 2020 when we were all new remote, and how that changed to May of this year. There are solutions out there right now that didn't exist 2 years ago. So we've kind of adapted and definitely changed the way we work just to keep pace with what's available. And that's the evolution step. Keep what works, ditch what doesn't. A lot of industries, education, tech, and healthcare, they all had to invent new ways of doing things now that we all weren't gathering in offices together. And it would be a mistake to go back to the old way of doing things, even though it can be tempting to revert to that, right? A lot of this goes back to communication. You just can't lean over and ask your colleague a question right now. You have to be far more intentional to do that. So putting things out there where people can persist information can be really helpful for teams to be high performance. And then the last one here is to be compassionate. Empathy in the workplace is a big buzzword, but really it's more about compassion. And I read an anecdote that I really like about this. There's a book called The Art of Happiness. And the Dalai Lama relates the relationship between empathy and compassion this way. He said, picture yourself walking along a mountainous trail, and you come across a person being crushed by a boulder on their chest. The empathetic response would be to feel the same sense of crushing suffocation, which would render you helpless. But the compassionate response is to recognize that the person is in pain and do everything in your action to alleviate their suffering. So a compassionate workplace is an effective workplace. I would say that 25% of my communication in one-on-one meetings is personal in nature. It's just connecting to each other as individuals, no different than how you would do it in an office. So productivity, how do you make sure that you're getting the maximum or optimal output as you work? I'm sure that we all feel we spend too much time in meetings that are unnecessary. So reduce or eliminate meetings if you can. So this was an actual really bad knee-jerk reaction to the pandemic. People were like, oh no, we can't collaborate, we can't communicate, we're not in an office anymore. So everything turned into a meeting. Like my calendar just turned blue. It was very sad. And that was something that I had to be really intentional about fighting back against. It's like, we can do things asynchronously. If we must meet, we can group our meetings together in a certain time of day. I actually lobbied with my managers to get our meetings moved to the mornings, because that way I could guarantee myself several hours in the afternoon to just get work done. If you're scheduling a meeting, be really good about not over inviting. Make sure that people who are truly optional are marked optional, so they know it's an FYI instead of you have to be here. And one manager move I really liked was when my manager came to me and said, we got a meeting problem, I totally know. If you find yourself in a meeting and you're not needed, you have total permission to just leave. And I'm like, all right, I will do that. So part of it's just giving the people the permission to self-select in and out of things. Ditch distractions. Distractions can derail your productivity. And I'm talking about like this evil thing here. So my phone is mostly silenced. I've turned off most of my notifications. I kind of check things on my own schedule. But it can be your phone, it can be your personal email, it can be a television. So find out what those things are that are killing your productivity and mitigate them. One hack that I have is I have a personal laptop, I have a work laptop. They're never out at the same time. I have a single monitor. So one literally gets swapped out for the other at the beginning and end of the workday. And then I also have a door. The door is like really, really effective for keeping distractions at bay. A lot's been said about flow, this concept of being able to get into a groove when you're most productive, and then you kind of look up and you're like, oh my gosh, how much time has gone by? I've really been like in the zone here. So in order to get into flow, you need large swaths of uninterrupted time. So that's where my suggestion of blocking time in the calendar for you to do work is really important. There's a company called Cave Day, which I've done a few trials with, which is essentially virtual co-working. And the whole concept of Cave Day is you're shelving your distractions, you're sharing with a virtual group of people what you're working on for the next 2 hours, 3 hours, however long the time in the cave is. And you just work. And it's just, you have this ambient noise of people, or just the sense that there are people working with you. It's a really great way to keep your head down. So if you struggle with productivity, something like Cave Day can help. Also, ambient music, things with no lyrics or jazz or whatever lights your fire, those are great to put on as well. So the benefit of being, remote is that you can make whatever noise in your office, and it doesn't matter. If heavy metal's your jam, go for it. And the last topic here is don't micromanage as a manager. Just because you can't see someone sitting in their chair doesn't mean that they're not being productive. So you signal to your team that you trust them when you resist the urge to get every single detail from them about how they're doing their job. This can be really hard if you have a tendency to just need to be involved in everything. But give your team the tools they need to do their job, make sure they know what they need to do, and just let them do it. And then engagement. How do you stay connected with your coworkers when you're distributed? Starts with technology. So collaboration technology, there was a study that revealed workers who believe their employer is a technology leader feel a heightened sense of belonging when compared with those working for perceived technology laggards. So the question is, like, what technology does your company have to help its workers feel connected to each other and to the material they need to do their job? So if you're using this really clunky old software to help facilitate collaboration, that's a lot worse than maybe investigating something that's more modern, something that more directly addresses the needs. Like, there's new software that comes out all the time. So having the latest and greatest can help people feel more connected and that you care more about their collaboration. And then once you have those technology solutions in place, create spaces to socialize. Like in Teams, I have channels that are dedicated to all the different projects we work on, but there's also a channel called Coffee, coffee or water cooler, you know, and people can put whatever in there. I shared about a race in there, and it was really great because that was a way for me to share something personal without cluttering up the commerce that was going on in the other channels. But you can also have synchronous things. Early in the pandemic, I hosted virtual hangouts on WebEx, and they started off as weekly, just half an hour, and the rules were simple. No shop talk, have fun. And this was a global team. We would all come on, and we reduced the frequency over time because weekly was a little too much over time. But we really valued that time to get together and not talk about work. So I like to start or end calls with casual conversation, relating to each other as we would in person. When we were pre-gaming this webinar, I was having a good time talking about, where we live and, running and group fitness and all kinds of stuff. But the important thing is to take that time. Don't just sit there and wait for the meeting to start. I like to use items in the background to ask questions. So art is always interesting. Seeing something in the background, you can ask about that. If it's Friday, you can say, hey, what are your weekend plans? It might open the door to an interesting conversation. Openness and vulnerability. It can't all be about the weather and your kids. So open up and talk with your colleagues about topics that are outside of your daily responsibilities. I've never walked away from a conversation with somebody where it went below the surface and not been really appreciative to learn something new about them. And then lastly, just have fun. A little appropriate humor, appropriate's the important part, goes a long way. We're all human. We're all, when we're too serious about our jobs and remove the humanity from the equation, it really feels like work. But when we can have fun while we're doing it, it's a whole lot better. So I have to share this because speaking of humor, mid-pandemic, I created this. So I'm a designer and developer and, take on some challenges, nights and weekends to have a little fun. So you've all seen like the ambient noise generators out there that have like the sounds of nature, like in the woods or the ocean, or like office sounds or a coffee shop, right? Just to put on to feel like you're around other people. This is a totally like tongue-in-cheek thing. With this website at wfhsounds.netlify.app, you can turn on these different sounds. There's clarinet practice, or the doorbell ringing, or a coffee grinder, or a leaf blower. And disclosure, some of these were sampled from my house. But there's a button on the left called Wreck My Flow, which turns them all on at the same time. And then in that case, you can click Restore My Peace. Anyway, anytime I send this out, people are like, oh, this, I feel seen. This is my situation. All right. So I'm going to quickly go through a few things. Like a lot of the remote chat sessions that I have, some of them focus on things that you have in your office when you're working remotely, because everyone does it differently. So I have a top 10 things I wish I'd had from those early days, things I really enjoy right now. And I'll go through these kind of quickly, but like I love having a heated mug. This keeps my coffee hot. I never have to have that last few swallows of like lukewarm coffee. It's kind of gross. I'm best right now. I know there are certain systems that you can put on top of a desktop that lift just your computer up. Those are great too. But I opted for a 3x5 surface that I can literally raise my entire desk up. And I have an anti-fatigue mat under me, and I can spend a couple of hours in the afternoon or right now not sitting. And if you're feeling like a slump in your day, it's easy to just stand up and change that. I also bought a fantastic chair. So I sat on a ball chair for most of my career, actually, which was like really good for posture, but also really bad for discomfort over time. So I'm really appreciating having a comfortable chair. And also pre-pandemic, I wisely purchased a better monitor. So from those early days when I had a really small laptop screen, this is like the other extreme. This is a 34-inch wide curved seamless monitor, and it's beautiful. Bringing cute things into your workspace that mean something to you can just add personality and have fun. I've got baby Yoda here. The kids bought me this little bobblehead guy. But I have Funko characters all over. I'm a huge Funko fan. I have Doc Brown, Rick Grimes, Jack Sparrow, vintage Mickey, and of course, for those really special days, Grumpy of Seven Dwarfs fame. A laptop for me was another timely pre-pandemic purchase. I've always had a work laptop, but at home I've had a desktop, and that's felt kind of like restrictive because I can't take it with me. So now I have a laptop for personal use and I can take it to the coffee shop or go on a trip with it. So that's been great for personal projects. I have a great view. I didn't always have a great view from the apartments I worked from. I've seen a lot of parking lots, but now I can see out these huge windows. I see garden, my birds, my garden. I get plenty of fresh air, open the windows, and that's really nice. Stay hydrated, folks. So I don't drink enough water. I have a hydro flask now, thanks to my kids. Happy birthday to me. And it just keeps water cold all day long. And when it's at your desk, you'll be more likely to drink it. Plants. There are actually studies that show plants in your periphery improve your mood. So having a plant on your desk or behind you or adjacent to you, I have all three. That's great. I like to share a story about the very first place I worked remotely. We had plants in our apartment, and I thought it would be really cool, since I was there anyway, that I could take them outside during the day so they could enjoy some sun. So every day I carted our plants outside, and they ended up getting like infested with mites. It was disgusting. So I recommend keeping plants. I don't recommend treating them to a spa day outside. I learned that the hard way. And then the last one, if you have the luxury of having a pet in your home, having them in your office is such a mood lifter. If you have like a hard meeting or just a really tough time getting a problem solved, we have a rabbit, and her name's Phoebe. And I just love getting down there and like rubbing her ears, and it just makes everything a little bit better. And then things I wish I'd known. I wish I'd known what really matters, how little some of the things that stress me out actually matter. It's really easy to get riled up, and it's something I'm still working on. Conflict resolution, how to deal with difficult people. If I could take professional development over and over again, I would take conflict resolution. I've had 21 different bosses over my career, and some of them upset me, some of them were fantastic, but I wish I'd known that, this too shall pass. Fitness works. I wish I found fitness sooner. I wasn't always an athlete. And fitness is really important to my overall well-being now. I love getting out for a run. I love all the problem solving that I can do on a run. Extracurriculars, how important are these? So they're important for just being kind of well-rounded, but also meeting people. So I've gotten involved with local community chorus, heavily involved with ski racing with my kids. I'm into acting locally. And so that's just a really great way of getting out of your zone when you're working and go do some fun things on nights and weekends. But it is very hard to make friends. So I've realized you have to be very intentional when you want to make friends, especially if you're trying to make friends with people that you don't intersect with a lot. So I actually have a rotation where I reach out to different people every week. So I try to arrange a coffee or a walk or a hike, just something to touch base and try and cultivate those relationships. And it works, but you have to be really intentional. You can't count on other people being as intentional with you. I wish I'd known how fast time can go by. And I wish I'd known how much things would change. So I've learned to not get too comfortable with doing any one thing. Technology changes. I do a lot of professional development. The work I do now bears no resemblance to what I was doing 2 decades ago. The value of a steady meditation practice and the importance of self-care, these can really make or break your workday. If you don't do things to take care of yourself, you'll notice it. And then the last one needs its whole slide. So the number one thing I wish I'd known is that ironically, working remotely is typically an isolated activity, but the people around you can make or break it. So with that, let's go to part 3. Where are we now and where are we going? We see this pull back to the office, this need to be synchronous, real time, face to face. So where does that end? So before the pandemic, remote work was talked about, but not as much as it is today. It's been studied from every angle during the last 2 years. We've gotten really good at working remotely during the pandemic. It is not for everyone, and it is not for every situation. Companies announced return to work plans, then they had to abandon them. Throughout 2021, as the virus continued to do its thing around the world. But also during that time, other companies said, forget this, push and pull, we're 100% remote, right? Many managers before the pandemic had it's pretty unfounded, but a fear that out of sight means you're slacking off, right? And if you were really intentional about working remotely and making it work, you were not slacking off. And what the pandemic proved in most places is that while getting their work done, workers also reported increases in job satisfaction, physical health, work-life balance, and overall happiness. A year into the pandemic, PwC had a remote work survey in the United States, and they reported that 83% of employers said that the shift to remote work was successful for their company. That was a 10% rise over their survey the prior year. So not only did we get good at it, we got better. I like to show this slide because not all companies are as big as JP Morgan Chase with 125,000 employees, but this certainly is indicative of what companies, where companies' mindsets are, especially when companies have a huge footprint in real estate. So 6 months into the pandemic, in September 2020, Jamie Dimon said, we're all coming back. We're going to the office. This has been it's been a nice experiment for 6 months, but we've got traders, salespeople, bankers, and other key professionals that really need to collaborate. And obviously that changed because they had to pull back. And then in May of 2021, he had a stronger stance. People are coming back. And the quote was, people don't like commuting, but so what? And then April 4th of 2022, the company announced that it expects to have half of its employees working in person full-time because they have to. They're retail bank branch workers, they're security and facility workers, others who can't work remotely, but the other half of those 125,000 people will be able to be hybrid, coming into the office a few days a week, and 10% can be full-time remote. So that's a pretty big change in 2 years. So the way forward is hybrid, right? This hybrid term, 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, or flip that around. This survey from Slack, they talked to 9,000 workers in 6 different countries, and 72% preferred a hybrid model. 12% wanted to work in the office all the time, and 13% wanted to work at home all the time. And this is in line with a survey from January 2021, where the numbers were very similar. That survey was from the Future Forum. And interestingly now, preference is what is driving much of remote work, not necessity. So among those who have a workplace outside of their home, 61% now say they're choosing not to go into the workplace, while 38% say they can't because their workplace is closed or unavailable. So that statistic I just mentioned is at the bottom of the slide in the orange box, that's 61% who are choosing to work from home. So even though workplaces are available again, the percentage of workers staying home most or all the time is higher, far higher than pre-pandemic levels. So included in that jump, like on the bottom, in October 2020, 64% were working remotely because they just didn't have an alternative. They couldn't go to their workplace, and that's totally inverted now. But included in that jump to 61% are people who said that they've relocated away from the area where they work. They literally can't go back to the office. So that was a jump from 9% in October of 2020 to 17% in January 2022. So that's a fair number of people who are moving around because they have the choice to do that. And it's mostly good news. People are reporting, I got balance. Yeah. Getting work done? Absolutely. Advancement? I don't know, like the advancement thing is a little mixed, and it has been for me too. I've not been advanced as readily as my in-office peers throughout my career. And that was a concession that I made with my eyes open. But then this bottom one, connection, that one needs to work. 60% of people feel less connected to their coworkers. And that's a problem that doesn't have a silver bullet solution, but it's going to come from individuals, companies, industry groups, communities, civic organizations, all creating an environment where people can connect with each other, not only their coworkers, but their neighbors. And then that smaller group, but still a substantial group, it's like, no, I'm done with working remotely. I want to be in the office. So they say that they rarely or never work from home because of productivity or preference. They want to go into the office. Either they have inadequate space at home, or they really are afraid of a lack of advancement. So there's no one size fits all here, right? So that's where the hybrid things comes in. And as a last slide to convey the sentiments of companies and workers, I love this roundup from Gallup. So they say approximately half of the US full-time workforce, which is about 60 million people, report that their job can be done remotely. So of these remote capable employees, the four columns here, the one on the left, this is pre-pandemic, 8% were exclusively remote. I'm in that category. 32% were hybrid, and 60% were fully on site. After the pandemic, has mostly gone past us, February 22nd, that's really shifted. So 39% is exclusively remote, 42% hybrid, 90% on site. Anticipated location in 22 and beyond, this is companies. They say they want to be 24% exclusively remote, 53% hybrid, and 23% on site. And the last column is employee preference. Where would you like to work? So 32% would like to be fully remote, 59% would like to be hybrid. But look at this fully on-site number. It's only 9%. And we've gone from 60% all the way over to 9% in the course of 2 years. So I thought that was an interesting place to leave it. I did want to provide a link to my writing. If you'd like some references and places to read more about these two books, my website is scottpdawson.com/writing. I encourage you to check that out. And I will thank you for your time and open it up to any questions that you have today.
Thank you so much, Scott. Does anybody have any questions? I actually have one if nobody else has one.
Yeah.
On one of your slides, one of the things said to start meetings on 05 or 35.
Oh yeah, so I didn't actually talk about that. It was there. I think that came out of Microsoft, and it was a suggestion to build in time for folks to take a break between meetings. The fatigue of back-to-back meetings with no break can just put you in such a hole. And what they found with their research was that when people had a 5-minute break between meetings, that effect was really significantly reduced. So the hack is that you start meetings at 05 and 35, and you end them at the top and bottom of the hour, so that you enforce that built-in break. Nice idea.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I see some companies are doing that.
Yeah, and I feel that most people start the meetings late anyway, or you feel like it's late, but if you just start it 5 minutes after, maybe that wouldn't be
exactly. Yep.
I also saw something recently that was recommending limiting your meetings to 45 minutes, because that's kind of as long as people can really focus. And I've started doing that with my new member meetings. And we used to take a full hour. We would always fill all of that time. And I find that like cutting 15 minutes off doesn't lose anything. We're still able to get through everything. And that nobody feels shortchanged, and it gives people more of like a buffer.
Yeah, that's great.
This is also kind of about meeting fatigue. Because one of the things you were talking about is opportunities to connect and socialize and get to know folks remotely without it always being about work. But sometimes it can feel like it drags on even more to be like, oh, now I'm in front of my camera for another hour today for something that doesn't even relate to like me getting my projects done. And that can feel like more of a drag. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on how to balance that.
Yeah, so the thought I'll put out there is something I really like from my team. We meet bi-weekly just to check in personally, call it happy hour, but nobody's drinking. And it's at 3 o'clock on a Friday. And we might go an hour if we're having a really vibrant, engaging conversation, but we might call it at 35 minutes if there's like awkward pauses and people have just clearly had it. It's been a tough week. And my boss is totally cool. After it, he says, go home, have a nice weekend, right? So you have a little bit of a carrot there. It's like, oh, I get to hang out with people and I get to leave early. This is great, right? Because I don't know, there's something nice about recognizing that hey, nothing critical is happening Friday at 4 o'clock, right? And especially if we just do it every other week. So I think thinking creatively like that is helpful.
That makes a lot of sense. And being able to like flex the time based on where people are at instead of saying, okay, we're here for happy hour, you have to be here for a full hour. I can imagine that makes a big difference too.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a question if you've had any, maybe it depends on the project, any like, I find that working remote, some of the challenges, some of the projects that are challenging are when we're kind of sharing feedback on something that maybe is like creative content, or even brainstorming, I find just isn't quite as effective. Rather than being face-to-face, your experiences in website design, and we are going through a website redesign. And so far we're kind of early in the design process, but yeah, if you've had any like tools or maybe like structure format for just kind of collecting feedback and
yeah, absolutely. So just a general tool, like if you need to get synchronous and that I think synchronous for that type of task is really kind of crucial because you can ask people and really kind of collaborate, Aaron, what do you think about this over here? Right. And just wait for the answer instead of just tossing it over asynchronously and saying, do you have any feedback? And just sometimes you just say no. Just screen sharing is like the best thing that I've done. The software I use for design, I can just share that directly. But there are companies like Mural who have really great collaboration platforms where you can have sticky notes and everybody can be contributing to this kind of virtual whiteboard, and you can do polls and things like that. I've been in Mural-based meetings that are really effective for getting everybody's voice together. But sometimes you really can't stand in for that in-person stuff. It can be hard to elicit quality brainstorming, but to the extent that you can give access to technology like Mural, it can be really engaging virtually and really effective because you don't force people to travel for that either,
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions or comments, inquiries?
Inspiring to, I feel like we read, I don't know, I feel like I read a lot about this, but inspiring to really think about what it could look like in practice in our organization, especially like more intention with how meetings are scheduled. And I still find it interesting, like reading about the effectiveness of even having half days a week that are completely meeting free across an organization. Seems it is tough. I think it's more and more challenging because, as you mentioned, that like different everyone's kind of has a different cadence to their day and week, and so it's like, where do you block time and how do you have any synchronicity?
Yeah, and part of it's also like with an organization your size, it's totally feasible to say, when do you work best? As far as doing independent work and try and figure out like, all right, so what are logical times that we can come together? And the aspect of having meeting free swaths of time or days is just a huge thing for overall productivity because you do get those times to get really into flow.
Yeah, this was a great presentation. I've our agency works with a few of our employees are remote workers. One of them we have down in Florida. She moved down there during the pandemic to be with family, and she's fully remote now, and it's worked out great for her. I'm experimenting with sort of a hybrid working situation. You know, sometimes I'll work from my home office, and you know, I'm selling insurance here, so you know, a lot of times I'm on the road, or you know, I am in the office working with other account managers, and that's been, you know, your tips and tricks have been things I've also been, you know, not necessarily struggling with, but you know, experimenting with and seeing what works and what doesn't, and you know, when am I more productive, and it's just been interesting to you know see how it all works now that so many more people are remote. You know, those who may not have been are kind of taking advantage of that and experimenting with, you know, doing that kind of work from home, or you know, on their own, not necessarily in the office.
Right. And that's great to hear too, because, you know, you're using the right word, experimentation. You know, you find out what works and what doesn't, and the solution for you is not necessarily the solution for somebody else. So
Right.
just don't be afraid to try new things, and you know, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I love that.
I do like putting in the FaceTime with the other employees. So I do like, you know, I like being in the office, you know, a couple times a week at least, you know, just to get some FaceTime in and, you know, let them know I'm a real person.
Yeah, I didn't touch on one-on-ones, you know, and I do travel. I do go to New York periodically and actually see people in 3 dimensions. But one-on-one meetings, whether they're virtual or in person, those are like a gold mine of information. You just learn to work so much better with somebody when you have that time to just share directly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, thanks. I look forward to reading the book.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
I do have one more question, actually.
Oh, go for it.
Scott, do you have thoughts about sort of digital etiquette, especially when it comes to Zoom meetings? And what I kind of mean by that is like having your camera on or off, having a picture of yourself, like participating in chat, like those sorts of things that we didn't necessarily grow up with rules around etiquette for. Yeah.
Yeah, so cameras on or off is actually really interesting. And I think it depends on the culture of the team that you're on. Some people are simply not comfortable having their face on the screen all the time. And it can be exhausting. Never, unless you work in front of a mirror, are you staring at yourself all day long. It can, like, I hide my video all the time, even if just so I can have people see me, right? But I will minimize that or throw it in another screen so I don't have to look at it all the time. It can be really exhausting. So I think having your cameras on or off is a mixed bag. Having them on certainly helps with communication because it's not all about the words. It's about you nodding your head or looking confused, right? Like all of those nonverbals, it really helps to see them. As far as the avatar goes, everywhere that allows me to put up a profile photo, I put the same profile photo. It is not me in a club. It is me and it's a professional headshot, right? Because that's the world I'm inhabiting and I have it consistent. So whether it's Slack or on a website that allows me to upload things or in email, like it's all the same photo. It's part of my personal brand. So I would encourage people to take advantage of that and make sure that they're presenting themselves in the best light. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're coming to the end of our time. Want to thank you again, Scott, for your presentation, and this will be available for others to view later this week.
Great, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, anything else to add, Sarah, in closing? Okay, great. And I personally have wrote down a few takeaways that I'm going to try and implement. So I really appreciate it.
Good luck.
Okay.
Have a great day,
Have a great
everybody.
day, everyone. Bye.